Episode 9. This should be the penultimate episode. I don't know it yet because this is the intro. And I'm not going to film another intro. This is going to be the intro. But by the end of this video, I should be hitting the switch, testing the hydraulics. So the first video where the car is actually going up and down, we should see it laid out on its wheels, see what it looks like on a set of wires, before the final video, which will be the car actually completed and being collected by the owner. So in this episode, which is day 4362, let's say, I've got to extend the rear hoses. Not the rear hoses, but two of the hoses aren't long enough because of the layout. So I've got 2 extra lengths of hose. These are standard rear hoses that come with a kit. And I've purchased a couple of these little hose links. Pretty sure these are 9/16 jig, and they fit into the 9/16 jig end of the hose, and then you can fit that straight into the other end of the other 9/16 jig hose that's on the car, and then you can fit that to the pump. So that'll be all the hosing done and dusted. Then I need to run the switch wire, which was in yesterday's video, so I need to work out where to fit the panel in the dash and run the wire underneath the seats back to the back of the car, ready for wiring into that terminal block that we had a look at. And then finally it's a case of cutting, crimping all the wires, fitting disconnects. So we'll need a stack of crimps. So these are the toys that we're playing with today. We've of course got the pre-wired switch panel to go in with the 9-core wire, of which we're only using 7, if you remember from the previous video. We've got these hose extensions with these little links, these fittings, so we can extend those 2 hoses aren't quite long enough. And then we need to make up some battery cables. So this is 50mm square cable. It's very pointy, not very good at this stuff. 50mm square cable. We need to crimp it with some, these are 50x8, so the 50mm lugs for 50mm cable. And then I've got an 8mm hole, so you're looking for the 50-8s. We're going to heat shrink the ends of the cable, so we've got a length of new heat shrink there. We need to make up the disconnect. These are welder's disconnects. I think they're called bins type disconnects. It's simply just a plug that you can easily break the connection with if anything was to go wrong. Tools wise, most important tool for today is the old crimp tool. This is like a 25-30 quid crimp tool off eBay. It's nothing fancy, but it gets the job done. And on a 50mm crimp, I like to use a 35mm crimping jaws, and if you can just make that out. The 50mm leaves it a bit baggy, so I always go for the next size down. So I think that's everything. The battery terminals are already in the car. I use this style battery terminal, post style. I think they might be called marine style battery terminals. This is obviously a used one. There's brand new ones that are in the car that I'll show you in a minute. And these are just easier to use because you can get a better connection with your 8mm cable lug, like so. Yeah, it's Saturday morning. It's about -1 degrees, which is about 30 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. So it is cold. You see, it's frosty out here. And here's the Impala. It's kind of on wheels. It's sat on pallets at the moment. I don't know if you can see better from this angle. It's sat on some wheels. It's really low at the back. It's kind of low at the front, but we're probably going to cut a little bit more coil out of it. But then there's a bump stop mount in the way that we're going to have to consider. Probably going to have to cut that off the frame. Here's the install so far. So in the last install video, don't think the batteries were in. I think the pumps were mounted, the solenoids were in, which are hidden underneath the battery trays, as you can see. The battery rack is mounted in, so you should be able to see underneath there. It's all welded in and sealed. I just need to get underneath there with some under seal, just to give it a nice coat to protect everything that's been that's been wire brushed in preparation for welding. So the hoses that are coming out the trunk floor, they're coming through a rubber bung now to protect them. And this hose, so this is going to be the front pump. We've got one hose already coming through the trunk floor. I'm probably going to try and route it, so instead of it coming down the middle, it's going to go down the side of the car there. And then we need to get the other front hose, which is coming through the hole on this side, to go to that fitting. Now it will go, you could put a right angle fitting in there, but then it'd be going straight across the back of the car there, which I think looks terrible. So with that hose extension, I might even run a shorter hose yet, I don't know. I'm going to see how it fits. I might use another return line because I've got some of those spare, just to extend that hose. Maybe run it round the back of this spring mount, the trunk spring mount. And the same with the rear. So one of the rear hoses has got loads of room to go from that rear ram all the way around to this fitting. But this one, like up there, is not quite long enough. So again, needs a little extension for it to get to where I want it to be. I think I'm going to run it around the back here. So I'm going to go ahead and fit those little extensions in the back of those hoses. And then that'll be all the hoses in. The only thing to do then with the pumps really is to put a bit of fluid in, a bit of hydraulic fluid to fill the tanks up. One more thing that I need to do is put the tie down bars on before I wire the batteries. So there's the tie down bars on either side. Now let's use these stainless nuts on the threads at the top. You can obviously adjust the height of this thread that's coming through, because you've got that threaded bit of tube at the bottom, so you can adjust the length of this bar so you've got enough thread sticking through on the top. So as you can see, I've on the first instance tried it with it's just a return hose, spare return hose that I've got, brand new. There's that length fitting between the two hoses over to that front hose hole there. I'm going to try the shorter one. I don't think the long one will be necessary, plus I'll end up with quite a big coil of hose kicking around in the back of the car. And run it around the back of that hinge mount for the trunk lid and run it down into that fitting. And there you go. So that's the little link hose. It runs around. There's the connector and there's the hose running across the back. So what I'm trying to do is keep this area free, so all the hoses are mounted behind whatever subs or beauty panel that are going to go across the back end of the trunk there. So now it's just the same with the other pump, the rear hoses. So that's the hoses on. That's the front pump, both hoses tucked around the back, running out of eye shot. Try and even this one up a little bit, I think, so it looks the same on either side. It's all about symmetry, isn't it? And then you've got that extended hose running up around the back of there, so all the hoses will be hidden behind whatever beauty panel or subs and amps, etc. will be going in the trunk. So now I'm going to try and run that switch wire back around the front of the car. There's a switch panel underneath the driver's side. This is the sort of area that people tend to run the switches. So you've got to try and find a way to get that panel to mount up inside the trunk without it failing on all these brake releases and stuff. It's nearly always quite tricky. What you want to try and find is some existing holes that you can utilize, which you can screw straight into one of your holes. Then I try and put like a bonding sticky back tape to get your alignment right, and then stick a second hole in. So we're gonna have a mess about once we've got the alignment how we want it. Get some screws in there, get it fitting quite nice. This is going to be the issue, this handbrake release, because it's going to be right underneath the switch panel, whichever way we go. And then this cable, so the switch wire, can run up inside the back of all of this dash and stuff, and pull the carpet back and run the wire excuse me, run the wire underneath the carpet. Normally there's a bit of channel that you can run down this side, so you don't have to take the driver's seat out, or the front bench seat even. I take these kick panels off, front and rear, route the cable down the side of the seat. So the cable will come down here underneath the carpet, and then up through, there's a bit of cable tube in there, conduit, and it will come out the conduit here, and then we make somewhere for that block to mount. Got a few pieces of trim off now, so of course the switch wire will run underneath the dash here. Run it underneath this carpet. All this trim's nice and loose. We're underneath the carpet, down the inside edge of the seat, so it doesn't foul on anything. And then it'll come out the back underneath this bit of carpet here. And then all these are stuck down, so I don't really want to pull any of this matting up. I'll run it the best I can up underneath the seat and back to the back of the car. So let's get that panel now so we can run the wire. After a bit of further inspection, I'm always going to struggle to get the switch panel in here because of that handbrake release and this ball vent. But upon further inspection, the ball vent isn't actually connected to anything, so I'm sure Zach won't mind if this is actually just removed. It actually makes it cleaner under here. It almost looks like it was an aftermarket fit, but never had the hose connected, which is weird. So I'm going to take that off for now, and then I'm going to line the panel up with this screw hole here. I'm probably going to have to get a longer screw to go in there, and then drill a hole in the panel somewhere for that to line up. But if I can get it around there, you should be able to just about use the handbrake release without fouling on the switches, and that looks pretty good. So the next step is to take all the switches back out of the panel, get the panel lined up to where you want it to be, drill your holes, get it mounted, and then run your cable, remount your switches, and then it's into the back of the car. There's the panel in. It's got a strip of like number plate tape in there, and it's only got one screw holding it in at the moment, and that's because I didn't want to drill any unnecessary holes in the dash. That one screw's holding it quite firm with that tape, and if it does come loose over time, which I don't think it will, it's always something that can be added. So the switches are in loose at the moment. If you look underneath the dash now, that I've left a loop of cable, so if you needed to cut and rewire for whatever reason, you've got a little bit of length up the front end, so you're not trying to scrabble it from the back. It's just loosely cable tied out of the way. Not very pretty, but you can't see it, that's the main thing. This brake release comes all the way forward without hitting any of the switches, which is good. And you can just about make out the cable running around the back of the dash, and it goes underneath this carpet here, it drops down, runs into that channel, and then down the side of the seat here underneath the mechanism. It doesn't foul on that. And then it comes through in this little gap up here underneath the seat, and then pops up there, and now it's in the trunk ready for the next part of the wiring. So I'm just going to finish putting the panel back together, and then I'm going to wire in that block with all the terminals on it. And if you remember, we've got the numbers with the colours, so we know which one does what. Makes it dead straightforward. And then it's on to wiring the trunk. All the trim's back on. Panel's got its extensions on. Looks pretty good. All the switches sound nice and crisp. Cables all run, all the interior's back together. Back seat's out for now. Put that in later. Just need to make sure that those rear rams clear the back seats. Next, you need to put the wiring terminal block on the end of the switch wire. So if you remember, it's this one of these. and it'll be numbered from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That will run in line with our numbers on here. So the blue wire will go to 1, purple wire will go to 2, etc. And then we know that wire number 1 needs to go to a 24 volt live, wire number 2 needs to go to your front solenoids, 3 rear solenoids, and so on and so forth. So we're going to do that now. I'm going to put a crimp on each of the wires from the switch panel, and that will go on these terminals here, 1 to 7. And then I need to get some lengths of wire for everything else, so preferably black if I've got some, so I can run length of little thin black wire all the way to the solenoids and to the dumps and to the 24 volt live on the batteries. Taking the batteries out, and I've run wire from this bank of solenoids, as you can see, and that runs up there. It's going to go behind there, and then in that tangled mess up there. And then there's a wire from this bank of solenoids too. And then there's wires coming out of the 2 dumps. I've put them on push fits, and I've put electrical tape around them so they can be removed, but they'll be hidden behind the pump. So from this angle you won't be able to see any of that wiring, hopefully, or very little of it. And then there's the 24 volt live for the switches there. So all the small switch wiring is now run into the parcel shelf. That'll all get tied up, it'll probably all get cable tied to these hoses that run over the back there. So it looks a lot tidier. Now I'm going to run the battery cables, so the heavy 50mm stuff with the 50 by 8mm crimps. I need to do the disconnect as well. You can see that's the stud for the earth terminal, and I've cleaned the paint off it. So I need to make up a length of cable that'll come round or underneath this battery tray, then out to here, and then part of the disconnect will be sat here long enough so you can hang it out of the trunk if you need to. And then the other part of the disconnect will go back up and mount to whichever end the earth is going to be, the 36 volt earth. And then to get the earth disconnect to link to that bank of batteries, I'm going to run a length of cable through this steel box section. Hopefully it'll fit. So the 2 banks of batteries will be linked together with one single earth disconnect down this side. So let's do a little video on making up cables. So this is the crimp tool we use. It's not fancy, just a cheap one off the eBays. The jaws that I use are 35mm. Yes, that doesn't seem to make sense, but trust me, when you're doing a 50mm crimp, if you use the 50mm jaws on this crimp tool anyway, it's always baggy. So I'm using 35mm crimps. And I don't know how long this cable needs to be yet, so I'm just going to crimp the whole thing pretty much, just that length. So you want to get the right amount of copper core. Strip your wire back and you don't cut yourself. Your Stanley blade. There's your copper core, yeah. Then put your 50mm crimp on and make sure you get all your strands in. Give it a good twist. And again, like with the small crimps, you want to be able to see the copper core sticking through that hole there. And then get your crimp tool and line up the crimp. Make sure the little tap's closed. Pump that up into there, and then just keep on squeezing until the gap is all gone. There you go, that's a 50mm wire crimp, so don't worry about this gap too much because we're going to put a piece of heat shrink over it anyway. And cut yourself a length of heat shrink. Open that up so it's nice and snug. And with your heat torch or gun or whatever you use, shrink that down. It just looks better and will protect the ends of the cables. Whoa, that's hot. So yeah, lovely. That's that done. So now I'm going to go back into the back of the car. I'm going to bolt this into the battery tray terminal, that stud that I just showed you in the last little clip. That'll bolt to there and that'll become your earth. And then I'm going to cut this length of cable to suit my disconnect. So let's go outside. So that piece of cable I've just crimped and sleeved is going to go onto that stud. So you can sort of guesstimate the length, and then I'm going to run it underneath this battery tray. It's going to come out somewhere here. It can either come out around the back there or underneath the tray, and then out. And then you want to have enough length so you can flop the disconnect out the back. Sometimes it's better to do it longer because you can always wind the cable or tuck the cable up inside that wheel well or up inside that quarter panel. So I'm going to cut it about here and then put the disconnect on. So there's that length of cable cut, nice and neat. And then we're going to put the disconnect on one of these ends. Now, it's always good to remember which end to fit onto which part of the cable. And as the battery terminal is going to be the live end, you don't want that to come off the battery terminal, because then if that touches anything on the body anywhere, it will earth out. So this will go on the body end and this will go on the battery end, and that's how the disconnect works. So you bang it in there, twist that, and then you get your connection. Bang it in there, twist that, there's your connection. So I'm going to use this piece to go on there. So always remember to put that on first, otherwise you'll have a nightmare taking it off, put it back on, etc. And then you want to clean that sleeve back to about the depth of that hole. It's a little bit more than you were taking off when doing the crimp. Just like that, and that slides in there. Sometimes they've got a sleeve in them, sometimes they haven't, depends on the size of the cable. I think these will go from 35 all the way up to 75mm, that's why they have that sleeve. So that will go in there, you tighten that up with an Allen key as tight as it will go, and that will sleeve that. Nice and tight so the cable can't escape. So that's the first part you disconnect, and then just slide that over. There's two little ridges in the brass part and there's two little ridges in the rubber part, so they should line up, and then you just pull that over. This can be pretty tricky. There we have it. So that's one end of the disconnect. You see how that is showing, whereas on this side it won't be showing, and that's the side that you want connected to the battery so it doesn't earth out in the body, and this is the side that you want connected to the battery tray or to your earth point. So I'm going to refit this back in, bolt this up tight, and then that's one side of the disconnect done. I've just had to change that stud because it's snapped, so I've put a better one in. Make sure you use good quality studs. Double knotted it, it's got a spring washer, so it's getting a good quality earth for that disconnect, which is then hanging out the back of the car. Now I need to do the other part of the disconnect, which will run to the first or the 12 volt battery of the 36 volts, and then run some more cables. Wiring done, so everything been cut and crimped, terminated. That's the linked earth, if you can see. That earth there goes all the way through this cross piece and then joins this terminal. So these are now two 36 volt banks. 12, 24, 36. 12, 24, 36. That's the live for the solenoids, and that's the live for the solenoids there. I've done it that way so the batteries can stay the same way with the handles both facing the same way. So we're pretty much there now. Just need to put a bit of oil in the tanks. I need to wire the switch wire, which is all that messy stuff up there. So there's the 7 wires, there's 3 that you can see there, and there's 3 coming out of that side, and then there's an extra one which is the 24 volt line for the switches. So I'm going to do that next. So the boot build is more or less finished. Everything's in, it's all wired up, albeit if Sol just looks into the back there, still a bit messy up in the back, just up in there. So you see all the wires, everything's connected. I don't know whether I've got the dump wires correct yet, but I can swap them over when it comes to testing the switches. So we're at the stage now where I need to put the disconnect together, hope that I don't get any sparks, and try the switches. All the hoses are connected up, all the wiring's tight. Let's see what happens. The spooky bit. Yes, so we're good. It's a good start. So now the system's live. The system's live, there was no sparks, no clicking noises. So now I need to go and test the switches. So Sol's going to stay around the rear end of the car.
Have you got a
So
stand?
if something goes wrong, you can pull a disconnect.
What the hell do I do with the camera?
You just drop it. Okay, so first things on here is dumps clicking. Dump coils are working. Don't know if I've got them in the right order yet, but we can figure that out later. So now it's time to hit the solenoids. So the first few licks is the fluid getting down the hydraulic line, so you won't get any movement to start with. When it does start moving, you need to bleed the lines a little bit and top up the fluid, especially in the front pump. Okay, that was just a coil, I think. Is that Ellie? I hope. You made your jump, Sal?
Yeah, slightly.
Too far out and this one a little bit too far in, so let's go back down. Right, so I just need to turn that ram on that side because the hose is hitting the back of the seat. It's just that hose was hitting the back of the seat, just put out in the seat. So that the hose on that ram was rubbing that metal frame that the hose goes through. So I've just turned the ram so the hose is more at a right angle. So let's try again. I think the rear dumps set up correct. So then hit the rear switch. And then this should be rear left. And this should be the rear right. So let's try the front. This should be the front there. So there, it's not a problem, just pull the disconnect to swap the wires around in the block. Is it gonna squeak? Might be alright. officially a Lowrider. I'm just going to swap the wires around on those dumps. So the front dumps are these two. I'm just going to swap those two wires over because I've got the dumps wired wrong. Okay, so those front dumps should be correct now. Let's get X back together, give it the old tap, make sure there's no electrical issues that we've missed. That's the front up, and then this switch should be the front left down, and that should be the front right. It's got a bit more colour out of that. It'll be even better once it's had a bleed. She's working. She is working. So,